Today on the show, the state of America. It's a nation divided, a nation in tumult. But is it a nation in decline? A nation whose glory days are behind it? Or is America as strong and innovative as ever? I'll talk to three authors who set out to explore the real America, beyond the Beltway and beyond the headlines. Jim and Deborah Fallows and Stephen Brill join me to discuss this. And reading, writing, and arithmetic round the world. Global lessons from the one man who has spent his career studying the best education systems around the globe. What the U.S. can learn from others. Also, tick-tock, tick-tock, seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, and years. Just what is the nature of time? And are our days truly numbered? I will talk with the brilliant physicist Carlo Rovelli.
Time really goes at different speed depending how you move and where you are.
But first, here's my take. In September, Google will celebrate its 20th birthday. When it was founded in 1998, it was one of many search engines, but it quickly became the chief gateway to the internet and is now one of a handful of tech companies that dominate not just the American economy, but also increasingly American life. It recently received a birthday present from the European Union, a record $5 billion fine for violating antitrust laws. That came just a week after the UK slapped Facebook with a fine for allowing Cambridge Analytica to mine personal data from as many as 87 million Facebook users. The penalty was much smaller, $660,000, but it was the maximum allowed under British law. These punishments are one sign that the era of unbridled faith and optimism in the technology industry is coming to an end. As the information revolution took off in the 1990s, we all got caught up in the excitement of the age, along with the novelty of the products and their transformative power. And yet, as these revolutionary technologies created new industries, destroyed others, and reshaped communities and cities, we simply assumed that this was the way of the world and nothing could be done to change it or shape it. That would have been socialist-style interference with the free market. But the result does not seem to be one that a libertarian would celebrate. We now have a tech economy dominated by just a few mammoth companies that effectively create a barrier to entry for newcomers. The other noticeable consequence has been the erosion of privacy, highlighted by the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal. Because technology companies now deal with billions of consumers, any individual is a speck, a tiny data point. And since for most technology companies, the individual consumer is also a product whose information is sold to others for a profit, he or she is doubly disempowered. Change is likely to come from two directions. Regulatory action in the West will force companies to play by the rules, as the recent fines show, and will create new rules that give more control to the individual. In May, the European Union instituted the General Data Protection Regulation, which makes it much easier for people to know how their data is being used and to limit that use. Violators can be fined up to 4% of their global annual sales. Importantly, these rules apply to any company working with Europeans' data, so American tech companies have had to change their policies too. The second direction is even more intriguing and comes from the East. Until recently, as the Indian entrepreneur Nandan Nilekani pointed out to me, there were just a handful of companies with more than 1 billion users on their platforms, all companies based in the United States or China. Google, Facebook, Tencent. But now India has its own billion-person digital platform, the extraordinary Aadhaar biometric ID system, whose creation Nilekani oversaw. It is the only one of these massive platforms that is publicly owned. That means it does not need to make money off user data. It's possible to imagine that in India it will become normal to think of data as personal property that individuals can keep or rent or sell as they wish in a very open and democratic free market. Add innovations in blockchain technology, and we are likely to see even more challenges to the current gatekeepers of the internet in the near future. Change is coming to transform the world of technology. properly handled, it can produce freer markets, lower barriers for new entrepreneurs, and fresh technologies combined with greater individual empowerment. Now that's something even the technologists in Silicon Valley should be celebrating. For more, go to cnn.com/Fareed and read my Washington Post column. And let's get started. Okay, I want to step away from the fray of day-to-day, minute-to-minute, second-to-second news for a moment and talk about the big picture of America, the 30,000-foot view. Let's forget about the partisan rancor for a bit and look at what is really going on in the country outside Washington, outside the Beltway. And I suppose the big question is America in decline? Is it headed for trouble? Is it in a nationwide depression of sorts? Or is it vibrant as ever, thriving, growing, innovating? Joining me now are James and Deborah Fallows, the husband and wife authors of Our Towns, a 100,000-mile journey into the heart of America, and Stephen Brill, a journalist, entrepreneur, and the author of Tailspin, the people and forces behind America's 50-year fall and those fighting to reverse it. So, Steve, let's start with you, because I think you paint a very important picture that I think people don't adequately understand, which is that a core element of what has made America great, the kind of upward mobility, the social mobility, the ability for bright, hardworking, poor people to move up, has kind of been arrested or stagnated in various ways and for various reasons. So lay out what that problem is.
Well, what I decided to do when I set out to write this book was try to understand why it seemed that the core values, the core qualities that make America great seem to be in decline, whether it's the ability of Washington to get anything done, the kind of bipartisanship we used to enjoy on big issues, whether it's the income mobility that you just mentioned, whether it's the monetization of our democracy, the inability of people without money to have anything that approaches an equal voice. And what I found was that our core values in many ways had been hijacked. The First Amendment had been used by corporate interests to dominate our politics. Meritocracy itself had some unintended and not good results.
So when you hear this, Jim Fallows, I know you and Deborah went out into the country and you saw some surprisingly optimistic things, but you've lived, both of you, in Washington on and off. You know this world that Steve Brill is talking about. How do you make sense of that piece of it?
So I think over the years, we've talked about China, where Deb and I used to live, and made the point that in China, everything is simultaneously true someplace in the country. And I think that's the case with the U.S. The U.S. is not quite as chaotic as China, but it's a similar thing where we agree with all the pressures Steve is talking about of sort of distorting the U.S. distribution of income, of opportunity, of the corruption of politics in the past generation. And what's interesting to us, and we feel that is, it's becoming better and better understood. It's an obvious part of politics. Steve has laid it out in his book. We're talking about a part we think is not as well understood or realized, which is this contrary renewal, reform, dispersed effort across the country of people saying we can find ways to create different opportunities for people whose parents might have worked in giant factories. Those factories aren't there anymore, but these people can have jobs in the wind turbine industry, or they can have them in the robotics industry or whatever. Of the amazing role of immigrants and refugees, which despite the national rhetoric, which is so poisonous on this topic, city by city, places that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, immigrants and refugees are stimulating the economy. They're running city government. They're very important civic leaders. And so our sense is there are two Americas, but in a different way from what we're usually talking. There's the America of national politics, which is so dispiriting and near a near historic low point. And there's this other America not fully recognized of people inventing new ways to get things done at the local level.
Deborah, describe the journey. I mean, what exactly did you guys do?
Well, it wasn't 30,000 feet. It was actually 2,500 feet across the country. We were in our small plane for 4 to 5 years, not nonstop, but going
This
from
is a tiny single prop plane.
single
This is a
engine.
little propeller plane.
This is not net jets or exec jets. It's a little propeller plane where we would hop from town to town and stay in these towns for